on Sky News Australia. This is the Rita Panahi Show.
Good evening and welcome to the Rita Panahi Show. Coming up tonight, the Sydney gay and lesbian Mardi Gras shunned the police but embraced the Palestinian cause. We'll discuss that. We'll also look at why Donald Trump is a clear favourite with the bookmakers to win the 2024 presidential election, with the latest polls from the swing states showing the political persecutions or prosecutions are backfiring. And of course, it doesn't hurt Trump that his biggest opposition is this guy.
Can you give us a sense of when you think that ceasefire will start, sir?
Well, I hope by the beginning of the weekend. I mean, the end of the weekend. At least my national security advisor tells me that we're close. We're close. It's not done yet. And my hope is by next Monday we'll have a ceasefire.
Okay, thank you.
That just fills you with confidence, doesn't it? And as always, we'll have plenty of lefties losing it, including the ladies of The View. And this outraged mother who doesn't understand why the local vet will not treat her son, who, after all, identifies as a cat.
Son does identify as a cat, but I cannot take him to a vet because I tried that.
We've got plenty to cover. Let's jump right into it with Sky News contributor Kosha Gator. Kosha, welcome to the program. Now, last night we explained why the gender wage gap report should not be taken seriously after segments of the media failed to spot the massive holes in this report. And more cracks are appearing in the Workplace Gender Equality Agency's ranking of the best and worst companies to work for in terms of gender pay equality. Janet Albrechtsen writes in The Australian that the data they collected does not compare men and women doing the same job in a company. It is unadjusted for anything that happens in the real world to explain differences between women and men. This is what we discussed last night, Kosha. Yet much of the media treated this flawed report as if it was gospel that should be beyond criticism.
You know, these agencies around the world, this one and their counterparts elsewhere, it almost serves as shaping the opinion of people and kind of providing a veneer for then activists to continue activism rather than actually being research-oriented or data-oriented, because those two factors that you mentioned, anyone who's looked at this issue knows that women make different choices on average in terms of the hours that they work, the types of professions that they choose. And if you take their argument to the logical endpoint, it would mean that everything has to be 50-50, including the not great jobs that men do, right? Garbage collecting and things like that, and it just doesn't make sense, but that's not what this is about. It's about providing a cover.
It is just about equity, and when you're talking about equity, you're taking away choice. And people should be able to make decisions about what sectors they want to work. If they prefer to be in education as opposed to engineering, there shouldn't be trying to cajole them into different professions or paying professions what the market has dictated they do not deserve. And that seems to be another question now. They're saying, well, no, these jobs deserve greater payment. You should be paying, I don't know, nurses the same as you pay surgeons, or paying flight attendants the same as you pay pilots. But that is just, again, in the real world, not feasible.
That's it. I think, you know, if the outcome is fixed, that they want equal pay in all circumstances, then there's only two alternatives: either cajole people, as you said, into choosing exactly the same life and work choices, or pay people differently for the same for different work, and that doesn't make sense.
Now, the Deputy Liberal leader, Suzanne Ley, she seems to be clueless about why this report is flawed.
And I'm pleased to see the scrutiny that is being applied today with the release of this data to organisations in Australia. My message to corporate Australia is it's not good enough to have a morning tea and cupcakes and pink icing if you are not also doing all that you can to promote and support women in your organisation.
Now, moving along, Pride in Protest, a group that describes itself as a grassroots collective in so-called Sydney, who wish to restore the protest roots of Mardi Gras and challenge systems of injustice. Well, they're celebrating the disinvitation of the New South Wales Police Force from the upcoming parade, saying New South Wales Police are guilty of institutionally supported abuse, racism and homophobia. But Kosha, you will be happy to know that they are on the Free Palestine bandwagon in support of a regime that is, well, frankly, brutal in its treatment of homosexuals. They have declared they are marching to demand no pinkwashing of genocide-free Palestine. I hope they mean free from Hamas.
Who's going to tell them? The cognitive dissonance in these groups is really interesting, and it's easier to protest those things, sitting in the countries that they sit in, where they can do that sort of armchair demanding. Life would be a little bit different if they lived in the part of the world that they're protesting for.
Well, this is another issue, I think, because they've achieved equal rights in Australia, in much of the West, marriage equality, across the board. So why aren't they campaigning for those people who are living in regimes where homosexuals are oppressed, systematically brutalised, most of the Middle East, with the exception of Israel? Why aren't they advocating for their downtrodden brothers and sisters there? That is, I think, something that needs some answers. It never seems to be a focus for the activists.
I think the job description is easier over here since they've won, and the whole apparatus kind of supports it more. It's an easier job than doing the harder work of what you're talking about.
And here they can find new battles like, I don't know, giving puberty blockers to 13-year-olds. Now, let's go over to France, where President Emmanuel Macron is urging fellow European leaders to take action on Ukraine, not just sit around and wait for the US. He even suggested putting troops on the ground. He said that's still a possibility. But, Kosha, perhaps he should be reaching deep into his own pockets. According to the Kiel Institute, which measures military aid sent to Ukraine, France has committed €500 million compared to Germany, which has given 17 billion, and the UK 6.6 billion. Of course, all of that pales into insignificance, Kosha, when you look at the amounts the US has contributed.
It does, and the whole issue of Ukraine has really turned into a lightning rod issue and a very polarizing issue as the months have ticked by since the invasion began. And largely in the West, the citizenry, the electorate, is less and less supportive of sending aid. That's just the reality. And so a lot of these leaders are looking at that audience. But then there's also a lot of pressure internationally and reasons for why they want to support Ukraine. And they're also looking at that audience. And I think what Macron's trying to do is kind of speak to both audiences at the same time, who contradict each other. And that would reflect the aid that he's given, since it is very unpopular. But then he's simultaneously speaking a different tongue, I think, to the leaders and saying that. And I think that's what we're seeing evidenced here.
There's been much commentary about Donald Trump's comments about a week ago about NATO and the threats he made to try to pump up their funding from the European allies. How do you think he will handle it if he's back in the White House? How will this conflict be impacted? I know it's an impossible question.
Yes. $1 million question, though. So look, he has famously said, when I'm in, it'll be done in 24 hours, right? That's what he says. He doesn't tell us with what or how. It sounds like, if you take the bluster out of Trump, what he's saying is some kind of negotiated deal, which will include some ceding of territory, which is unpopular in some corners. It sounds like that's kind of the angle he would go with, because he doesn't want more U.S. involvement. He doesn't want more funding, and that's the way to do it. But who knows? And there's a lot of wood to chop before we're in that scenario.
Well, he famously threatened to nuke Moscow if Putin invaded Ukraine under Trump's reign. So he's not above making some threats. And I guess if they don't know if he's serious or not, they behave. And they behaved whilst he was in power. Now, let's talk about Gavin Newsom's California. Crime in San Francisco is so bad that customers are no longer allowed to shop by themselves in certain stores. They need to be escorted. Everyone gets a personal shopper, even to buy hardware. Take a look at this local news report.
This is what you'll find entering Fredrickson's Hardware and Paint in Cow Hollow. The table alerts customers to wait for assistance at the door, a move that's being attributed to, quote, rampant shoplifting.
It's pretty bad. I mean, the dollar amounts are pretty significant. and with the tools, and now we're getting snatch and grabs where they come in and take whole displays. So it's getting kind of dangerous for the employees and the customers.
Store manager Sam Black says for 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening, an employee will work with an individual customer. The table serves as a way to keep potential thieves from moving freely in and out of the store.
We just want to make it uncomfortable for the thieves so they go somewhere else.
Black says over his 24 years of working at Frederickson's, the theft is the worst it has ever been. Staff has had to drill down pots and pans to keep shoplifters from swiping them. They've also had to put in locking systems to keep people from pocketing tools and other household hardware. One customer telling Cron 4 off camera that the situation is just sad.
This is Democrat heartland, and this is Gavin Newsom's California. He was mayor of San Francisco before he became the governor, and so many Democrats want him to run for president and, I don't know, bring some of this magic to the entire country. It is, like they said there, a sad, ugly time.
It is, with such a charming spin on it. Personal shopping, that was that was creative, whoever came up with that. But you know, it's true, it's so sad. This is one of the most beautiful, successful, iconic cities ever created in the history of the world, and what has happened is a direct consequence of policies. You decriminalize felony charges, turn them into misdemeanors, you convert the place into a consequence-free society. This is what you're going to get. And, you know, we've seen them clean it up. When President Xi was visiting, they could clean up certain problems very quickly in a day. But I think a lot of people feel that this is by design, because if we wanted to stop it, we know how to.
Well, of course it's by design, because as you said, it's policies that have got us here. And California is about the most blessed corner of the world. It's beautiful. It's blessed with natural resources. It should just be home to the most successful cities in America, and yet Californians are fleeing in huge numbers to Texas and Florida and Tennessee because of that.
It is. It really is a shame. And you look at El Salvador and Bukele as an election over there. It was the homicide capital of the world, and so quickly he was able to turn that around with much stricter, consequential approaches to how you govern society. That is a signal for anyone who wants to do it, but I think things have to get bad enough before we get somebody like that in there to turn it around.
As long as they keep voting for more of the same, they're going to get more of the same. Now, let's have a look at this story. Television and radio journalist Lara Logan has called out the wave of taxpayer-funded censorship in the US at a Senate committee on Capitol Hill on Monday. Have a look.
You said you've been targeted over the last 10 years. Can you describe what precipitated your targeting?
Yes, reporting the truth about Benghazi. I was attacked by one of those NGOs that masquerades as a nonpartisan watchdog. In violation of its 501(c)(3) status, it occupies a highly partisan position. I'm talking about Media Matters for America. I'm sure there's many doctors in this room, scientists who've been attacked by the same people that run that. David Brock, for example, another political assassin, now runs an organization called Facts First USA, which is designed to make sure that your research, Dr. Hazan, never reaches the people or the public. There are other organizations like Defeat Disinfo, which claims to be a PAC that goes after disinformation, particularly set up to target COVID and throughout COVID with General Stanley McChrystal and the other people that advise that organization. But Senator Johnson, it's not a secret that these organizations exist. What is not widely known and talked about is that it's paid for by us. It's paid for by the taxpayers in your omnibus spending bills that get shoved through the House and the Senate.
This is something Michael Schellenberger has been exposing. We've spoken to him a number of times. It's an issue right here in Australia, though public awareness here is quite low. In the US, it's helping to destroy trust in the media.
It is. That was she's pretty fearless with that testimony. The NGO Racket, which is how some call it, is something that has low awareness. It's bubbling up in the U.S. in this instance with the border crisis. They mentioned that as well, that there's NGOs over there helping along, with the crisis there, and so on and so forth. And the fact that it's taxpayer money going to it is something that's very problematic, very angering to a lot of people as they know about it. I don't know what it's going to take for that to change, because the way those bills are passed, it's just such a big block. It's so hard to pull that apart. But at some point, when it gets bad enough, again, I think that's when people will demand change.
Absolutely. Kosha Gator, thank you so much for your time this evening. Now, my next guest is a top student who got about as close as you can get to a perfect VCE score. He's now a law student and a tutor for Year 12 students in Melbourne, and he's uncovered that this year's study material has a strong left-wing bias, even stronger than previous years. Edward Croker, thank you for joining me. Let's start with the most important subject, if you ask me, English. All VC students have to do English or literature. And when you look at the English reading list for this year, more than half of them promote radical identity politics. Only 6 out of the 36 are from the classic Western canon. And teachers are expected to select 5 books, but because of the complex rules at play, it means they have to select at least 2 of these identity politics texts. So even if you've got a teacher who's aware of what's happening, isn't in favour of the indoctrination, they still have to pick at least 2 of these highly political books to teach their students.
Well, Rita, thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you. This is a very serious problem in my mind, especially since Victoria is supposed to be the education state. Well, I think, Rita, one can safely say it's the non-education state, because what we have here, I think, is indoctrination. The real problem is not that these subjects, these materials are being taught, but it's that the students are not allowed diversity of opinion. They're being forced to advocate for these woke things, to explain these woke ideas and not contest them. So it's quite serious in my view, and I would say that parents should certainly be concerned, particularly when they're paying for these classes.
Well, that's going to be my question next up, because I'm going to look at some of the course material and whether, as a student, you can argue against some of these narratives and still get an A or an A+, or whether, if you actually want to secure a decent score, you're going to have to regurgitate this propaganda. Now, let's look at legal studies, and this is called key knowledge, so-called key knowledge all legal studies students are expected to learn for their exams. This is from the official study guide from the Victorian Curriculum and Assessment Authority. Students must learn the difficulties faced by different groups in the criminal justice system, such as First Nations, young people, culturally and linguistically diverse people, people with mental health issues and people with disabilities. Now, it doesn't sound like they're even letting students debate this. One can argue that, I don't know, the criminal justice system is more lenient on certain minority groups, certainly more lenient with youngsters.
Well, there's certainly a strong argument that that's the case, Rita, particularly in recent years with this Labor government in Victoria. They've really introduced many reforms that have indeed, in terms of crime, gone soft on certain people. But Rita, to go to your point, I've really discovered here that there is no room to argue the contrary viewpoint. I tutor legal studies, I study this in school, and the paramount problem here, Rita, I think, is that students might be stopped from getting into their dream careers. If they want to study medicine, law, engineering, any other degree, they might be stopped from getting into them because they refuse to advocate no. In other words, one could say that students really being penalised for advocating no, and that's to the voice, treaty, truth, all the woke issues that you can talk of, and in a law context, particularly those ones, voice, treaty and truth. There's also republic. Students are going to have to advocate, yes, for a republic, which of course, for I would say the majority of our viewers, that's something that's concerning when they're not allowed to advocate the other way.
Well, this is the issue, because as long as they are doing what's asked of them, where they're advocating a position and then backing it up with facts, figures, sound arguments, that is what should secure them the score, not the political position they take. And now it's not just legal studies or English that's affected by this left-wing bias. The VCE History Guide wants students to discuss the ideas that influenced challenges to power, including things like colonialism, Aboriginal nationalism, feminism, sexuality. Again, Woody, in this area, are students expected to agree with all these ideas? What if they challenge them? Is there a bit more room to move in the history subjects, or is it as restricted as it is in every other subject?
Well, Rita, it's quite ironic, because I would think that history is supposed to be perhaps the most factual course, the most factual content. There shouldn't be because you should be able to state facts. On this day, this happened. On that day, that. But history, I can tell you, Rita, is by far the most politicised of the subjects. And so it really is a problem, particularly when you talk about Australian history, because these students are being indoctrinated to the belief that Australia is a terrible country, is a backwards country, is a country with enormous problems. When I think really what we should be doing, Rita, is teaching the opposite. We should be pulling our country up rather than pushing it down. And unfortunately, this Labor government in Victoria just doesn't understand that.
Now, I heard an account from a parent just this week whose daughter is at a private school in Brighton, and the teacher asked who celebrated Australia Day to the classroom, and not a single person put up their hand, despite the fact that several of them did celebrate Australia Day and do feel positively towards Australia Day. There was just this pressure to self-censor. So, Edward, is that again another concern, that even before university in high school, kids are too scared to speak honestly about opinions they hold, even if those opinions are very much mainstream?
Well, it shouldn't be the case, but I think it is, Rita, particularly in young people, because I think that peer pressure can be quite a significant problem, especially the students. They haven't spent years, developing their own independent thoughts like adults have, and into the real world outside of the school. So they're much more likely to acquiesce to the things that people are telling them. And the education system, the fact that this government is really putting their hands in it and not providing for education is a big problem. I spoke to my uncle the other day, and he reminded me, he's a bit older than I am, he said, young Edward, the socialists, their first step is always to try to take over the schools, the education system, because the young people are the easiest to indoctrinate, the people who won't push back, as you've seen.
And the left have been open about their march through the institutions, starting in schools and academia. Edward Kroger, pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Rita.
Still to come, lefties losing it. You don't want to miss that. And I'll have a special guest from the US who's going to unpack the sex scandal that could throw off the trial of the century. That's after this. Welcome back. Now it's time for Lefties Losing It. And let's start with the reliably clueless ladies of The View who lost it when Dr. Phil gave them some sobering facts and figures about lockdowns and school closures that they championed.
And the same agencies that knew that are the agencies that shut down the schools for 2 years. Who does that? Who takes away the support system for these children? Who takes them away and shuts it down? And by the way, when they shut it down, they stopped the mandated reporters from being able to see children that were being abused and sexually molested, and in fact sent them home and abandoned them to their abusers with no way to watch, and referrals dropped 50 to 60%. So
there was also a pandemic going on, and they were trying to save kids' lives.
Trying to save lives. They didn't close schools in Denmark, Sweden, Florida, and they had better results in saving lives than places like New York, which had some of the longest lockdowns, mask mandates and school closures. But what are facts and figures to these women? Dr. Phil did try to explain to them that healthy kids weren't dying from COVID. Indeed, we knew from the start of this pandemic that they were the age group at the lowest risk.
Are you saying no school children died of COVID?
I'm saying it was the safest group. They were the less vulnerable group, and they suffered and will suffer more from the mismanagement of COVID than they will from the exposure to COVID. And that's not an opinion, that's a fact.
Well, yikes, even the Daft View audience were with Dr. Phil there. Now let's go to Lefting It, Losing It on UK television. Here they refer to a monstrous killer as a she and her when he's a biological male who will thankfully be sent to a male prison. But the good folk in the media are very careful not to misgender a murderer. Listen to how many times this man is called a she or her.
A woman has been found guilty of murdering an individual in Oxford months after she filmed herself killing a cat. Scarlet Blake has been sentenced to life. The minimum term is yet to be revealed in court, but she has been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 24 years. Some of the features that have resulted in that term are a significant degree of premeditation, the judge said, substantial planning, and it was shown that you were looking for someone vulnerable, the court said. In the mitigation at the sentencing, the judge had said that she was 23 at the time of the offence.
J.K. Rowling was among those mocking Sky News UK, not us, UK. She wrote, "I'm so sick of this, SHIT. This is not a woman. These are not our crimes." Now another blast from the past, courtesy of our socialist friends. If you've ever wanted to know why socialism fails everywhere it's been tried, then take a look at this clown show.
Keep the chatter to a minimum. It's affecting my ability to focus. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade. Okay, is there a speaker against name, chapter, pronoun?
Point of personal privilege.
Yes.
Please do not use gendered language to address everyone.
Comrade had when they spoke about the trauma, I would like to ask people to please use trigger warnings.
Thank you. I would ask the same.
Hi, my name is Erica. I use they, them pronouns. I'm from Lincoln, Nebraska.
Go ahead.
Cassandra, she, her from Metro DC. People are really crowding the aisles.
Okay.
It'd be really nice if we could limit it to like 6 people for and 6 people against, actually standing up so that we can actually see what's going on in the room.
Thank you, comrade.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Yessie. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm part of the San Diego chapter.
Comrade?
Point of privilege. I'd also ask that the safety considerations that were mentioned earlier by the comrade of having the aisles filled with people be respected.
Point of privilege. Well, my pronouns are Persian and princess, or should I identify as a Persian cat? It's all the rage.
My son does identify as a cat, but I cannot take him to a vet because I tried that, and the veterinarian told me that because he has human anatomy, that he does not know how to work on him or diagnose him with anything. And he legally cannot. So, and while I do think that is a form of discrimination, because, you know, my son, if he says he's a cat, he is a cat. And he needs to be treated like that, like one, you know? But I'm not going to press charges because I know that he could lose his license if he did work on my son. So I'm not gonna try to sue him or anything, so don't worry. But this is something that I want to raise awareness on, because I do think that people that identify as an animal should be able to go to the vet. You know, that's the medical attention that they're wanting. And so I really do appreciate you asking this question. I think it's an important topic that we discuss, because if we don't, we're never going to make progress. And these people that identify as cats are going to have to continue going to human doctors.
It's becoming impossible to figure out what's real and what's parody. I don't know, but I've got to tell you, I'm starting to feel like this guy.
From now on, I identify as a paper straw because nobody wants me. I'm horrible at my job, and I can't function for longer than 5 minutes without completely breaking down. Thank y'all.
Joining me now is Associate Editor of Reason magazine, Billy Binion. Billy, let's talk about Trump's Georgia case, where he is accused of participating in a wide-ranging scheme to illegally overturn the 2020 election. Fani Willis is overseeing what some are calling the most important trial of this century. It could have an enormous impact on the 2024 election. Yet we're finding out that she not only secretly had sex with a subordinate, she misused public money, financially gained from it, it looks like. But did she also potentially lie under oath? Tell me all about this case.
Yeah, so essentially, someone testified during her hearing to determine whether or not she should be disqualified from seeing this case through that she actually started a romantic relationship, and that there was no doubt in this former employee's mind that this former relationship, or this relationship with her special prosecutor, started in 2019, which would mean she not only hired her lover to oversee what I did call the most consequential trial of the century. And then I say that whether or not you support the prosecution or you don't, even if you don't support the prosecution, we're prosecuting a former president in state court where pardon power doesn't apply. So if he's convicted, there's a good chance he will go to prison, and that's very much precedent setting. So not only, like I said, is it possible that she hired her boyfriend, but it's also quite possible that she lied under oath about it. And you refer to those kind of questionable financial transactions. It seems that they exchanged money at different points, and she claims she always paid him back in full in cash payments. So there's, of course, no record of it. People can debate all they want whether or not that makes sense. But I will just say, in the States, I thought we had decided that having sex with a subordinate in a professional setting was obviously ethically problematic. And, I write for Rita magazine, which is a civil libertarian publication. And I write a lot about law enforcement accountability. It is often difficult in the US to hold prosecutors accountable when they violate the Constitution, which has always been kind of reversed to me, because if you're enforcing the law, I don't think you should be above it. And those on the left in this country are often on board with that premise. But during this hearing, I'm sure you saw as well, a lot of the commentary from liberal-leaning people. It was a lot of like, Fani Willis is a girl boss, yes, queen, a man is not a plan, which is a quote she had in her testimony. And I just have to say that if you care about law enforcement accountability, which I do, and which many progressives claim to, that cannot disappear when we're talking about one of the most consequential trials, like I said, that could absolutely set a precedent and be in the history books, just because this woman is on your team. Like, principles do not you can't discard your principles the second they're politically inconvenient, because that defies the very definition of the word.
But you're so right about the media reporting. Some of it is almost laughable, painting any sort of scrutiny of this powerful woman as inherently racist or sexist, when on the face of it, the conduct here is just astonishing. She allegedly hired her former boyfriend, paid him over $650,000. People say he's not even properly qualified to take on a case like this. Certainly his work history doesn't indicate that. And we're now hearing that he was having lengthy conversations with the Biden White House. Can you tell us about that?
So I am not as versed in his conversations with the Biden White House, but I will say this, what you said about how this has become about race and gender. The piece that almost gave me a brain aneurysm was in New York Magazine's The Cut, which essentially made the argument that, it's racist that we're talking about a Black woman's personal life, rather than Trump and 18 of his associates allegedly trying to overturn an election. When none of this truly has nothing to do with race and gender. There was a line in the article, and I think this is shared by a good amount of progressives, that it said something to the degree of, if Trump manages to make this case crumble by, smearing Fani Willis, then that just shows that white men are held to a different standard of justice. And that is actually exactly backwards, because if Fani Willis's misconduct causes, like I said, this extremely consequential case to crumble, and if you support the prosecution, like a lot of progressives do, and you decline to hold her accountable for ruining the prosecution with, prosecutorial misconduct and abusing what is arguably the most powerful position in American government, which is the prosecutor, then you're holding her to a different standard of justice. And how does that make any sense? And in what case, Rita, I would pose, let's say that there was, someone was prosecuting President Biden, and let's say it was a man who, hired a special prosecutor and had sex with, a woman. I think there is almost no universe in which I can picture progressives being like, that's cool. That makes a lot of sense. I think people would obviously, and rightfully so, be like, hey, that's inappropriate. And we've decided as a society that when you have these really powerful positions in government, that there need to be basic ethics. And especially after the Me Too movement, we had this really big, robust years-long conversation about sex in the workplace and having basic lines drawn, and I refuse to not apply my principles to someone, just because we may agree on certain things. I mean, I'm a libertarian, I'm not a Democrat, so I mean, that doesn't really apply to me. But I do think, if I could come back to one thing that I do try to apply, and that I think everyone should, it's that principles have to apply consistently, because if they only apply, when they're politically expedient, and that's simply not a principle. It's just, you're just hackish.
No, I am with you. I am with you 100% there, and I think there's a very good reason why trust in the US justice system is very low at the moment, according to polling on that issue. And I think the treatment of this case may be relevant to that. I want to ask you about Fani Willis's other conduct in office. Now, she may not be alone here, but there are reports about her subjecting her employees to mandatory race training, including implicit bias tests that made those taking part ascribe badness to white people and goodness to black people in order to pass. What do you make of this? I mean, again, to me, this is patently racist, but it seems to be anti-racist in modern America.
Right, and I think it goes, I think you see that reflected in the coverage, and obviously, her DEI coverage or her DEI training isn't playing a big part in these, pieces about why she should be, essentially acquitted of agency here. But like I said, before, I think it is backwards, and I guess in some sense, like, you just kind of intimated, there's a certain kind of, I hate the term reverse racism because it's been kind of, bastardized, but there is something just perverse about saying that because she's a black woman. Another article I found that I did in that tweet thread that you were referencing was in the Washington Monthly that said, the only thing Fani Willis is guilty of, the divorce, she's a divorced mom and she's only human. I just don't understand why being a divorced mother, a black woman, whatever the case may be, why that means we have to hold her to a lower standard. That seems like very infantilizing and insulting. I think Fani Willis, she's in a very powerful position.
Absolutely.
I assume she's a very smart woman, and I'll hold her to the same standard that I hold all powerful government officials to, which is that they serve the taxpayer, and they need to do that responsibly.
Well, consistency is lacking across the board with much of the media these days, but not with you, Billy Binion. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Appreciated. And don't go anywhere. Ami Horowitz with the latest US news, including another fake Indigenous academic, plus Joe Biden's latest blunders and why the bookmakers have Trump as a clear favourite for a second term. You're watching the Rita Panahi Show. Joining me now is filmmaker and journalist Ami Horowitz. Ami, let's start with President Joe Biden. He made a huge call on the Gaza conflict while eating ice cream with late-night TV host Seth Meyers. Have a look.
Can you give us a sense of when you think that ceasefire will start, sir?
Well, I hope by the beginning of the weekend. The end of the weekend. At least my national security advisor tells me that we're close. We're close. It's not done yet. And my hope is by next Monday, we'll have a ceasefire.
Okay, thank you.
Ami, does that fill you with confidence?
Well, first of all, he was eating Van Leeuwen ice cream, which is overpriced, overhyped hipster ice cream, which I can't stand. Second of all, if you rewound that tape just a few seconds, he was talking with his mouth full, so gross, and I love mint chip ice cream. I think he's ruined it for me.
Gross.
Look, yes, of course, there's a callousness involved when you're talking about a ceasefire with the war going on between Gaza and Israel. But I think it's really mostly, yes, the callousness is so tone deaf. He is in a dogfight across the country, in particular Michigan, which has 250,000 Arabs. Michigan voted, at this point, they're supporting Biden at 17%, down from 40%, in a state which is the swingiest of the swing states. And the Arab population in Georgia and Pennsylvania, two more really important states, the Arab population makes up it's a larger population than his margin of victory. So just tone deaf in terms of dealing with a situation that has already been a significant drag and problem for him in the polls. So yeah, didn't seem to make much sense to handle it that way.
Army, he also, in between mouthfuls of ice cream, talked about visiting the southern border. That's where his administration has lost complete control. More than 7 million have come in illegally during that time. Let's have a listen.
Why make an order now, Mr. President? You're going on Thursday. Why don't now?
I've been planning to go Thursday. What I didn't know is my good friend apparently is gone.
And will you meet with migrants while you're there, Mr. President?
Well, I'm not going to announce ahead of time. Secret Service don't like me announcing exactly what I'm doing.
Army, he's referring there to Trump going to the border as well. Is he going to now delay his trip because Trump is visiting the southern border?
Well, first of all, I'll take your word for what he said. I couldn't understand a word of what that guy was saying in that clip. God, he's barely with us these days. Does it matter, really? Rita, there's nothing he could do at this point to salvage his standing when it comes to the American people and the border. He can delay, he can go. It doesn't matter. It all looks performative. Like he's showing up now. The Americans understand what's going on. He's just doing a dance because he is so underwater on the single most important issue facing our country today. The most important issue by polling data that people care about is immigration and the border. He is down by it's like 70-30, Rita. And the 30 people clearly have brain damage. So it doesn't matter what he's doing. It clearly looks as if nobody's buying it.
I'm with you there, and I think that's reflected in the latest polling we're seeing. Emerson and The Hill polling shows that in the crucial swing states, well, they are all swinging towards Trump. Let's have a look at this data. He's up by 10 in Nevada. Wisconsin is up by 4, Michigan 3, Pennsylvania 5, North Carolina up by 9, also 9 in Georgia and 6 in Arizona. This is when against Biden, when Kennedy, Stein and West are counted. When it's just Trump versus Biden, he's still gaining across the board. Army, I guess it's not surprising that when you look at the bookmakers, he's a clear favourite. Even with the Australian bookmakers, he's $2. Is this momentum, can this momentum be stopped? I know we're a long way away and a lot can happen, but it's hard to see Nikki Haley prevailing. It looks like Trump is the candidate, and if these polls hold, he's going to win again.
Yeah, when it comes to Trump versus Haley, no, that's a foregone conclusion. When it comes to the polls shifting and the amount of time we have, I mean, look, if I had to put money on it with those bookmakers, I'd put it on Trump. But the Republicans are doing their darndest to screw it up, whether it comes with IVF, when it comes to abortion, even this insane congressional plan to shut down the country. So yes, it could change, but right now everything is trending toward Trump. Trump has a positive approval rating. He is at almost 60% with the United States having a positive approval of his presidency, his past presidency. But if you really break down the numbers and look at those core demographics that are so important to Biden, the Hispanic vote and the black vote, 40% of black people have a positive view on Trump as president, when remember, he only got 8% of the vote. With Hispanics, 57% approve of his presidency, his last presidency, and he only got 38% of the vote. These are numbers that are very hard to overcome, particularly because that is your core constituency. I mean, he's actually almost dead even with young voters, 18 to 38. That's when he trounced Trump on. If you're not going to win young voters, you are not going to win. And then if you go down to more granular level and look at all the key issues, Biden is underwater in all of those key issues. So as it stands now, man, he's got tough sledding to win this thing.
That's astonishing. That is just mind-blowing that you got those figures coming back from black voters, Hispanic voters, young people. That I think that is absolutely frightening the Democrats, because these are just demos that they expect to be backing them and backing them in huge numbers. And particularly when you look at the black vote, because that is such a solid voting bloc. It always goes for the Democrats, around 90%. If that fractures a little bit and Trump manages to get a slice of that, what could that mean? That completely changes the landscape, Army.
It means President Trump. That's what it means. It means get ready for another 4 years of President Trump.
Well, brace yourself. Now, before you go, I want to ask you about this Ivy League professor who claimed to be Native American, been uncovered to be another fake, shades of Elizabeth Pocahontas Warren to it. And just like Warren, much of the leftist media is insisting it was all just a terrible mistake. They're saying Elizabeth Hoover didn't lie about her race. She was lied to about it, but she called herself Wind Chaser and a descendant of the Mohawk and Micmac tribes. She wore feathers in her hair for her college photo. So, Army, why did she never bother to check to see if this ethnicity was actually genuine?
Oh, yeah, I love when you give yourself your own Native American nickname. I want to be called the Slim Reaper. That's a cool name. Yeah, why did she bother to check, Rita? Because she said herself, she talked about all the advantages that she got in the workplace because she identified as Native American. She didn't want to check. She didn't want to know. Look, you know you're not a racist country when people are trying to identify as minorities, right? If you're Rachel Dolezal identifying as a black person, or you're Pocahontas identifying as a Native American, or as Professor Hoover as well, like, you know we're out of problems when people are looking to identify as minorities. And, you know, it's so interesting. Yeah, look, if you can identify change your sex, right? Identify as any sex you want, which, by the way, is far more determinative, sex is, than race. Race is meaningless, ultimately. Why can't you self-identify as a black person or a Hispanic person or an Asian person? I don't know why you couldn't if you could do it with your sex. So, yeah, that's where we are, the state of the world these days, Rita.
Good point. Army, you make an excellent point there. I think maybe in a few years, you will be able to. It will all be meaningless. Army Horowitz, thank you so much for your time this evening. And that's it from me tonight. I'll see you at 11 tomorrow. Douglas Murray will be joining me. Up next is Newsnight. Good night.